This is political intrigue. This too, and this. And even though I know what it is generally, I couldn't explain political intrigue if my life depended on it. And as one of my favorite parts of epic fantasy, this is something I need to learn. So I'm going to study some of my political intrigue favorites to break down exactly how political intrigue works, and then use these lessons to brainstorm ideas for effective political intrigue in my next series. Let the learning commence. I don't know why I said that, it just felt kind of dramatic. The traitor Baru Cormorant. So I just had an interesting realization here. It has to do with creating characters that are really good fits for a political intrigue story. As I was looking back at Baru Cormorant, I noticed that this is a character who's an outsider in this world. She doesn't know anything about the culture really, she doesn't know anything about this different country really, and she doesn't know about the web of alliances that exist, or who has power, or even what happened to her predecessors. There were so many mysteries for her just starting out, so many informational disadvantages. And this really helps build the foundation for this political intrigue because there's so many things that she doesn't know, and if she's going to be able to function and thrive in this world, she needs to learn about all of these things. Next, I decided to study Red Queen. I started rereading to see what I could learn, and read and read and read and read the Lies of Lamora. And one huge realization I had while reading The Lies of Lamora was about the types of power that exist and the people who hold it. So for instance, we have the mob leader, Kappa Barsavi. He's an extremely powerful criminal boss. He's very cruel and cunning. Another part of this opposition is the Grey King. He has seemingly limitless wealth, the backing of a super powerful bonds mage, and a keen intellect and the ability to manipulate people with it. And he's also very ruthless. And the third part of the opposition is the Spider. The Spider has the backing of the Duke, has tons of intelligence resources at her disposal. And what I realized when I was looking at this is that this is actually something John Tribby talks about, four-corner opposition, in which you have the protagonist or perspective character at one end, and then you have three opposing characters who are all in conflict with the protagonist and with each other at the same time. This creates a ton of conflict in the story, and in this case also adds lots of mystery in the form of the motivations for each of these characters and how they're going to act. Another thing I noticed when reading The Lies of Lamora are the interesting villains' machinations. Even though there's multiple oppositions in the story, the main one is the Grey King. And since Barsavi and the Duke and all of the Dons murdered the Grey King's family, he's going after them. He slowly goes after Barsavi, killing some of his most important allies and making Barsavi more and more paranoid. Then he uses Locke to fake his own death so that Barsavi thinks he's safe. Then he kills Barsavi and takes over his entire criminal empire. And then the last part of the Grey King's plan is that he tries to use this drug to make all of the nobles docile for the rest of their lives. I really like these machinations because they're not overly complex, but they're still really impactful in the story, create this air of mystery around the villain, and also set him up to be really powerful. Next, I decided to study A Game of Thrones. And one of the first realizations I had when studying this was how much the world is shifting around Ned as our protagonist. The king comes to visit and demands that he become the hand of the king. His son Bran is severely injured and someone tries to assassinate him. Peter tells them that the dagger used in the assassination was Tyrion's. Catelyn takes Tyrion captive without Ned's knowledge. Jaime surrounds the Starks and kills all the Stark men in retaliation. Catelyn tries to convince Lysa not to put Tyrion on trial, but she does anyway, and Tyrion wins. After Ned tells Cersei of his plan, Robert gets killed on the hunt. Robert declares Ned regent in his will. Cersei tears up the last will of the king, declares Ned a traitor, and the Gold Cloaks attack Ned. Throughout the story, the entire world is just shifting around Ned over and over again. It feels like this very dynamic game of power where things are always changing and all the other players are trying to control things. Another cool thing I noticed studying Game of Thrones is how reveals are set up by characters bending the rules or pushing the rules to their limits. Jaime is able to attack Ned in retaliation for Catelyn seizing Tyrion. Ned is able to strip Clegane of lands and titles because he's acting in the king's stead. Cersei is able to ignore the dead king's words because she has the soldiers on her side. Another thing I noticed were some of the common themes of these political intrigue stories: corruption, underhanded tactics, pragmatic realities winning over potentially high-minded ideals. So these are some of the themes I noticed through all of these books so far. Next, I decided to dive into one of my favorite books, The Way of Kings. And immediately I noticed two things: the mystery of what's happening in the story and the mysteries of Dalinar not knowing who to trust. So let's take these one at a time. First, Dalinar is having these mysterious visions which he thinks are sent to him by the Almighty, but they're not sure if the visions are true. Gavilar said mysterious last words to Dalinar, and he's not sure why the Parshendi assassinated him in the first place. It seems like someone tried to assassinate Elhokar. And the second part is not knowing who to trust. Sadeas seems to be on Dalinar's side one moment, he seems to be degrading him or trying to undermine him the next. Adolin doubts his dad because of his visions. Navani has jilted Dalinar in the past, and he feels that she may be trying to manipulate him. Elhokar is paranoid and seems unstable, and all of this creates this air of mystery throughout the political intrigue. Another thing I noticed in The Way of Kings is the way characters potentially shift the balances of power. To explain this most simply, I'm just focusing on the way that Sadeas does this. So first, Sadeas negotiates himself to be High Prince of Information, enabling him to potentially frame Dalinar for Elhokar's attempted assassination. Sadeas tells Dalinar that someone was trying to frame him, but tells him that from the beginning, he was trying to help Dalinar, and this builds some trust between them. Sadeas agrees to go on a shared plateau run with Dalinar after all the other High Princes rejected him, and plays nice with Dalinar for a little bit. Sadeas betrays Dalinar and leaves the plateau with all his men, allowing Dalinar and all his soldiers to get surrounded by the Parshendi. So throughout the story, you can see how Sadeas is shifting the balances of power, how he's changing things up to gain the trust of different characters throughout the story or degrade characters' trust in Dalinar. So next, what I'm going to do is actually try to apply this to the new story that I'm working on and see if I can brainstorm some of these political intrigue elements and have these elements available to me so that when I start outlining, I can make sure to include them and really bring out the political intrigue. Okay, so now I have this list of different foundational elements of political intrigue, and looking over this, it really makes me understand why my stories were lacking this element. The first story was probably the most heavy in the political intrigue realm, and the only elements of this entire list that were present in that story were stakes and complications, interesting villain machinations, and themes of corruption / underhanded action. Those were the only things out of all of these different fundamentals that existed in that first book. No wonder that it didn't really have this interesting element of political intrigue. That goes even more for the second book, which only had a little bit of political elements included at all and really could have benefited from a little bit more. So this is definitely something that I want to include in the next book that I'm going to be writing, and to make sure that I include these elements in the next story, I'm going to do some brainstorming here and come up with a bunch of different ideas around political intrigue and weaving it into the world that I've been pondering so far. And I'll try to check off a bunch of these different boxes and brainstorm different ideas for these different fundamentals. And then when I'm actually outlining the story, I'll be able to draw from these ideas and be able to include all of these elements in the story so that I'm really making the political intrigue as good as it can be. Because if you look at a story like A Game of Thrones or The Lies of Locke Lamora, all of these elements are included. So I don't want to just include a few like I did last time. I want to include all of them. I've been addressing this first prompt here of mysteries around what's happening and who to trust. And I brainstormed various ideas here for both of these. I came up with a lot of ideas around not knowing who to trust, and I think that's coming along perfectly. The mysteries around what's happening is a little less figured out, but I think as I do more of this brainstorming, as I go through for the other points, I might get some more ideas for that. So let's just continue with this brainstorming and see what we can discover. Basically finished going through the rest of this list, going through all the things that I could go through for now, and I feel like my ideas are going a little bit dry. However, I do need some more brainstorming for this because it's not really up to my standards yet. I'm not that good at writing these political intrigue, plots, and that sort of stuff. I mean, obviously it's something that I'm just going to need to practice and keep going with, but I do think that I need a break because just straight brainstorming and trying to make my brain think of ideas over and over and over again is pretty tiring. I'm going to do something else for a little bit, and then when I come back, I will be able to continue with this and maybe get some new ideas that will help really strengthen the things I've got going so far. So I just got back from my break. It was a nice, relaxing sort of break for my brain, and I finished reading the book Blood Song by Anthony Ryan today, and it turned out to be a very interesting ending. However, that is not what I'm here to talk about. What I want to talk about is the fact that the ideas are not really freely flowing still, even though I just had this long break. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is bring back a technique that worked really well for me when I was brainstorming my epic fantasy book 2. I really need to come up with some names for these so that I'm not just calling them epic fantasy, since I'm gonna have multiple series. Anyway, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go for a walk, and while I'm out there, I'm just going to brainstorm and just think through things and try to come up with ideas. This process of just thinking through and asking what if questions over and over and over again should hopefully bring up some interesting ideas. Let's go. So while I was outside, I did come up with a few ideas. I fleshed things out a little bit more. So there were a few seeds of ideas here and there, but the main idea that I came up with was not really so much of an idea, but really a realization about the stories that I was analyzing. If you look at the Game of Thrones, The Lies of Locke Lamora, The Way of Kings, all three of those have these huge betrayals in them, and I really love that aspect of all of them. So I was thinking that that might be a cool thing to include, and thinking about who would be the most painful to receive the betrayal from and how it could work in the story. So I started brainstorming that, but I'm not fully there yet. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go back outside. It's a little chilly, so I'm going to need to put on some gloves and maybe something to cover my ears, but I'm going to continue and see what I can figure out. So while I was on my walk, I had a little bit of a realization. I realized that because I haven't outlined this book yet and really figured out any of the story elements, it's hard to make any finite decisions on this, and it's really just me coming up with some of the seeds of ideas that I could potentially include in my story. For now, what I want to do is I'm going to go through some of these ideas and pick out the ones that I think are the coolest, and then I'll share some of them with you because I really want to be open and transparent with this writing process this time around. So let me take a second to go through here, and I'll be back for that in just a second. There were a lot of things that I came up with here in the brainstorming, and I actually like a lot of it, but I'm just going to stick with some of the main points and things that I like the best so that we can keep this, relatively short. Otherwise, I'll be talking here for like 20 minutes. Okay, so before we actually dive into some of these details, I need to give you a little bit of information about the story and the world. In general, there are 3 different countries. One is a country to the south, which is very technologically advanced. They already have rifle technology. The other 2 I haven't completely decided on yet. I was originally thinking they were going to be tribal peoples, but I'm not sure if I'm going to stick with that. Anyway, there's 2 different coalitions of smaller groups of people that may or may not be tribal. These 2 coalitions actually split off from one larger one originally, because in the past they had this really powerful magic and they decided that it was too risky to keep using. And this magic is actually cooperative in that you need 2 different types of users working together to be able to use it. And genetically, they're sorted into 3 different groups. There's people of the first type, there's people of the second type, and there's people who can't use it at all. So in order to make it so that they couldn't use the magic in the future, they split off into groups where one of the coalitions is only people of the first type magical user, and one of the coalitions is only people of the second type of magical user. They don't want to use the magic, but the technologically advanced Southerners are trying to invade, and the Westerners worry that if they don't team up again and use the magic, they'll both be wiped out. So that's kind of the foundation for this society world building wise. So one mystery that I was thinking could be present is that they don't know anymore why the people in the past decided not to use the magic. They don't really know what sort of power they were scared of and what event led to it, because some of the histories that they used to have were destroyed in some natural disaster or maybe in a war between the two coalitions. All they have left really is mythical knowledge about it. So it could be religious knowledge or just like plain myth and stories that have been passed down throughout the generations. And there are people who believe more in the myths and think that they're still like valid and real, and there's people who don't believe in them as much. Those kind of different types of people fall into factions of people who think that the magic is probably not that dangerous, or people who think that they should really stick to what the myth said and avoid using it at all costs. And this is just one little aspect of mystery that I think would be an interesting element to include in the story, where they're not really sure what is the right decision here. It means the conflicts between the groups who think that they shouldn't use it and the groups who think that they should use it are stronger, because we don't really know what the right answer is. And another thing I was thinking about is if there's people who don't want to use the magic and they find out that the governments are trying to start using it again, there might be some underground society that's working against this and trying to prevent their plans from coming to fruition. And on the other hand, maybe there were people beforehand, these underground groups, that were trying to learn and rediscover how to use the magic before any of this. So those are some of the main mysteries. Now, the next thing I want to talk about are potential opposition characters, and there's quite a few. I don't want to go into too much depth with these ones because I think they could factor in really interestingly in the story, and I don't want to give away all their motivations and stuff. There's potentially this merchant character, and he has relationships between both coalitions and also with the people in the south because of his trade. Let's just say he might try to use those to advance his own interests in society. And as part of the story, people from the Eastern Coalition, where the protagonist lives, venture west to the Western Coalition to try and convince them that they should work together to rediscover the magic so they can use it against the people from the south. And what I was thinking is that maybe the guide that's showing the diplomats around, that's helping them navigate in society, is actually not a huge fan of what they're trying to do, and she's actually working against them. And this actually leads us to one of the other elements of the political intrigue that I've discovered, which is having this person kind of be present in a new world that they don't really understand that well. And when the protagonist goes to the West, he will be in a place where the culture is different, where they have a different way of organizing society. He's like this really big fish out of water there. That's why the guide is so influential, because he doesn't really know much about the society or how to communicate well within it, and he's in danger of failing in his goal of joining the two together in pursuit of magic. I've got a bunch more ideas that I came up with in the process of this brainstorming for political intrigue, and I think that a lot of them are really cool, and I can't wait to try and incorporate these ideas into the story when I'm doing my outlining. And now that I've taken the time to break down political intrigue, I can't help but think that I should have done this sooner. I wonder what else I still have left to learn.